Yes, Asfiya, you can start now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Asfiya from class 11th Commerce. Today, I am going to give a presentation on the topic sources of business finance. As we know, what is finance? Finance is an activity of managing money. Business finance. Finance required by business to establish and run its operations. It's known as business finance. No business can function without adequate amount of funds for undertaking various activities. But why do business enterprise need finance? In order to produce and distribute goods and services, business needs money. Categories of financial needs of business. There are two categories of financial needs of business. First is fixed capital requirement and the second is working capital requirement. First is fixed capital requirement. To start a business, fixed assets such as land, plant, machinery, etc. are required. The amount which is required to purchase assets is known as fixed capital requirement of the enterprise. The amount remains invested in the business for a long period of time. Working capital requirement. In addition to fixed capital requirement, a business also needs finance to carry out the various routine activities such as purchase of raw material, payment of electricity bill, rent, etc. The amount required to meet these needs is known as the working capital requirement of the business. Working capital refers to that amount which is required to hold current assets such as stock, bill receivables, etc. Owner's fund and borrowed fund. Owner's fund refers to the funds contributed by the owners as well as accumulated profit of the company. The fund remains with the company and it has no liability to return this fund. Borrowed fund. Borrowed fund refers to the borrowing of the firm. It includes all funds available by way of loan or credit borrowed fund for a fixed period of time. Sources of raising finance on the basis of ownership. Owner's fund and the borrowed fund. Owner's fund have some sources on the basis of ownership. Equity shares, preference shares, retained earnings, GDR. GDR is in Global Depository Receipt, ADR is in American Depository Receipt, IDR is in International Depository Receipt. Borrowed fund, debentures, loan from financial institutions, loan from commercial banks, public deposit, trade credit, intercorporate deposit, ICD. Issue of shares. Share is the smallest unit in which the owner's capital of the company is divided. According to the Companies Act, a public company can issue two types of shares. First is equity shares and the second is preference shares. Let's discuss what is equity shares and what is preference shares. Equity shares, the capital obtained by issue of equity shares is known as equity share capital, and the equity shares are those shares in which do not carry any special or preferential right in the payment of dividend or repayment of capital. Features of equity shares. First, the primary risk bearers. The equity shareholders are primary risk bearers of the company because when the company suffers loss, the equity shareholders have to bear the loss. The second is claim over residual income. The equity shareholders have claim over the leftover income of the company. They get share in the income left after satisfying the claims of all creditors, outsiders, and preference shareholders. And the second is the preference shares. What is preference shares? These are those shares which get preference over equity shares in respect to the payment of dividend and the repayment of investment amount during winding up. There are some features also. First is fixed cap rate of dividend, and the second is no security. In this preference shares, we get fixed rate of dividend, but there is no security. Difference between equity shares and the preference shares. The first difference is the face value of the equity share is generally low and the face value of preference shares is generally high. The dividend is paid to equity shareholders after paying the dividend to shareholders. The preference shareholders get a fixed rate of dividend before equity shareholders. The equity shareholders are the primary risk bearers of the company. The risk is involved in preference shares is relatively less. And the equity shares are never redeemed or paid back during the lifetime of company. Preference shares may be redeemed on expiry of a fixed period of time or at the option of the company. And the last difference is the equity shareholders get the voting rights in a company. No voting rights under normal conditions. We get voting rights when the dividend is not paid for 2 years. Retain earning, a portion of net profit which is not distributed among the shareholders but retained as resources of a reinvestment is known as retain earning. Merits and demerits of retain earning. The first merit of retain earning is permanent source of funds, no explicit cost, greater operational freedom, enhances capacity to absorb losses, may increase market price of equity shares. Demerits, uncertain source of funds, opportunity cost not recognized by many firms, excessive plugging back may cause dissatisfied shareholders. GDR, Global Depository Receipt. Global Depository Receipts are issued against issue of equity shares in the global market. Capital collected from the issue of GDR is in foreign currency. No voting rights are given to holders of GDR. The capital contributed by the shares is in dollars. These shares are called depository shares. The Global Depository Receipt was introduced by the Citibank in 1990. In India, Reliance Industries were the first to issue of GDRs in 1992. ADR, American Depository Receipt. The depository receipt issued by a company in USA are known as ADR. ADR are bought and sold in American market like regular stock. It is similar to GDR except that it can be issued only to American citizens. IDR, Indian Depository Receipt. IDR is same as GDR except that issued and present in India. The depository issued except to investors in India against their shares. Thank you.